Thank you, Sipa. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sipa, for that briefing that and explanation there. Just looking at the first appendix, it's noted on page 3, we've got 2.3, where the says we don't have enough resources essentially to do as much auditing as we would require. Obviously, the council are overstretched in every area, but how serious an issue do we consider that to be? And is that a common or a widespread issue among local authorities, or is that something unique to Bristol?
So thank you, Councillor, for that question. I do not think that as we speak now, there is a significant risk in terms of the amount of resource that I have to be able to deliver an annual opinion. But I think the point that we are making in the report is that because of the size of the organization, the diverse delivery model of the organization, if you think about the partnership, the joint working, the companies, we have a huge control environment. What we are saying is that we are not able to audit every facet of the business, so we have to take on a risk-based approach to provide assurance and for me to be able to provide an opinion at the end of the year. That's the most important thing. So we need to continuously look at whether we have the results that are needed for us to deliver the opinion. But I'm not saying it's an issue now, but it justifies why we have a limited audit plan. So the challenge is making sure that we are focusing on the right things. That's very, very important, that we are focusing on the right things.
Thank you. David?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions about table 1 on page 29 of the big bundle. First one is about procurement and contracts management. Considering the issues that we've had over the past couple of years with procurement breaches and stuff, wouldn't it be better to allocate some days on that thorny issue to make sure that they're compliant, please? And also another question about 15 days allocated to governance systems, considering we're changing our mode of governance in the council. Is 15 days really enough, please?
Thank you, Vice Chair. The first response to the procurement, as we speak now, we are auditing compliant with procurement rules as we speak now, and there's also an audit which is ongoing on contract management. And the audit committee is aware that you are receiving quarterly reports on compliant procurement rules. So the idea is that, as you've seen from last year, so this quarter, we're not doing anything about that space, but we find that towards Q3, Q4, there will be more work on procurement, contract management, and you actually see that it's already provided for in the long list. That's the response to the procurement. Then in terms of governance, the idea is that, and I would want to take you back to the conversations that we had when we were talking about the assurance that is required by this committee on whether the committee system will be effective. And we said that you need to have independent assurance, but you need to audit that when you've given that time. So there isn't any time, but there will be time in the future quarters, because we need to get into May, let the system work, and then we can then do an audit to see that. Otherwise, if we go there too early, there'll be nothing to audit.
Thanks, that guy. Oh, Tim.
Chair, thank you. Just to come back on the last point that Simba made there, members will be aware that we've got a review baked into the new arrangements, which will scope out with new councillors probably towards the end of this calendar year. And as part of that, we will do precisely as Simba has said, draw on external assurance through probably the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. That's the current thinking around that, just to give you a little bit more context to what a review might look like in due course.
Thanks, Tim. Guy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. I found myself wanting to ask a couple of follow-up questions actually in relation to what colleagues have asked. But before I do, I just wanted to check. I'm 99% sure seems much louder than it normally is. The previous internal audit reports that we've seen are not confidential, but they weren't on redacted papers for any reason. I don't think they were. I'm just thinking specifically of the points we looked at. I think it was not the last meeting, but the one before, in relation to what savings were defined as and not. That wasn't confidential, was it? Apologies, very...
I'm not aware of there having been any with that confidential papers coming from our internal audit reports. If that's what you're asking.
Great, thank you. It was just, so one was in relation to procurement, given the, one of the things that featured in that last internal audit report pertained to the way the property was disposed of and the process the council went through in order, when it was disposing of land. And I was curious to know whether that fitted into procurement within this framework, or would that sit somewhere else? In other words, if the council's procuring something from itself, or it's looking to internally transfer a capital asset from one directory to another, would that count as procurement, or is that just a whole other thing?
Probably we need to have another conversation probably to explain to me probably what you mean. But I think in terms of procurement, there are elements of which is probably direct commissioning of services and products. But then if you think about property, then there's property acquisition and disposal. So there could be an audit that just looks at how the council acquires and disposes. So you wouldn't expect the disposal, acquiring of property into the procurement audit. So it would be a separate review. If you're thinking about property or assets, it's going to be a different review. I wouldn't expect that in procurement would cover that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. The other point was just stemming up from the questions that were asked a moment ago. It was just to, I suppose, make the point and put on record that my recollection is that money spent on audit tends to save a lot of money, as it represents one of the best uses of council expenditure that we can make, and it's to make sure that that's something that colleagues are taking to, for example, scrutiny meetings and budget setting meetings and that sort of thing, is that reminder that it's not always the most sort of, how to put this, sexy of political topics to bring up in the budget context, but nonetheless, it does let us spend more money on more exciting to some things. And my final question was just in relation to Appendix 1. There are some times where there are some things that are kind of above the level of an individual program. I'm thinking of more like a philosophy, something like agile working or agile workplaces, where you have a number of elements of the internal audit plan that are part of that overall program, that sort of almost like meta program or overarching transformation program. And I was just wondering how that sits within this. If there was one element, for example, of agile working that was delivering below expectations, does that lead us to look at the interconnected elements? Would that sit solely within the risk register, or would that be its own thing? How would that flag up to audit?
And I think the easiest way to look at this is that if the committee identifies an area that they are concerned about, we put it in the basket. We do a risk assessment and say to you, based on the risk assessment, it's a significant or it's not. But the committee might say, anyways, but we want assurance from this. Can you do this for us? Then we'll do it. So I think it's just whatever the committee is concerned about, we can do the preliminary to justify whether we need to do the work. But the committee, at the end of the day, will need just to say, okay, we need to do this, and these are the reasons, and we'll be able to do that for the committee. But I think the risks are vast. In transformation, the risks are vast, so we can only do a small element of assurance. That's why we give scope limitations in the reviews that we do, because we'll not be able to give full assurance on everything.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple of comments as well. One was, and I appreciate that there's been staffing issues that have resulted in the the investigation and investigation is not the right word. the order of in the disclosures in the area of the disclosures team, and having been bumped into this coming quarter. But yeah, I think that's so. I think it's disappointing, but I appreciate that there's reasons for that. And I'm pleased to see that processing planning decisions and the improvement plan in the planning department is one of the things that's being looked at, because I think we all know that from our casework as councillors that and other reports we see in council that planning is a big thing at the moment, and I think given focus of this committee over the past couple of years, the digital transformation programme being included is also an important thing. So those were my comments worth. And we've been asked to review and approve the draft internal audit plan. So having had that discussion and comments on it, I shall consider that we've done that, and move on to the Our Families programme update, and that's Vanessa Wilson.
Thank you. So obviously, hopefully you've had an opportunity to read the report. I just wanted to draw a couple of aspects, and actually picks up on a couple of questions both Councillor Hucker and Councillor Wilcox have raised just earlier. So as part of this Children's and Education Transformation, it is a system-wide whole system change. My report today is just on the non-DSG aspect. So we have two transformation programmes that go across children's and education. One is focused on dedicated schools grant, and then the other aspect, Our Families, is the non-DSG. But obviously there's a correlation between the two, because obviously you've got something like homeschool travel that sits on the revenue, and then you've got SEND that sits on, so those two. We also have huge interdependencies with the other top programmes across the council. So obviously on the property side, temporary accommodation and adult social care. But also we have doing some work in the digital and technology arena as well, so there's an interdependency there. From assurance point of view, we do have a dedicated transformation board. We have working groups that sit underneath for each. We have 3 core work streams: operating model, so that looks at, for example, the structure across both children's and education, looks at the culture within there, looks within the processes, technology aspects and practices. Then second work stream is all around your demand management. So actually, if you think about the financial pressures that sits in children's and education on the revenue side around things like placements, home to school travel, fostering and things like that, demand management and our supported housing pathways. And then the third one is the commissioning partnerships. So that's how we can be smarter. From assurance, we have a dedicated families programme board. We have representatives from audit sit on that, so Philly sits on that programme board and is part of the quorum. We also have, obviously, our councillor portfolio, Ashley Craig, sits on that board at the moment. Obviously, I'm doing a review to see how that works when we move to a committee system, but it is really important we have that. We also, I make sure that it's cross-cutting, it's not just internally focused, and the board's made up of internal body team members, which is where I've done a review of previous transformation programmes within children's and education, and the reasons why probably that many of you sitting across from me right now question some of the assurance and previously and the delivery. We also have representatives from health colleagues, ICB sit on the board. We have then representatives from the corporate services as well. That board then feeds up obviously into corporate leadership board. The corporate leadership board have a monthly oversight of all the top 5 transformation programmes where we have further. We're also going to provide updates at scrutiny. I also have people scrutiny, resources, and then obviously coming to audit committee. I also, as part of the transformation programme, it is a continuing piece of work. So a good example is I work alongside with Phil Eames from audit. So he will sort of identify, he will sort of send reports to me that have been done within children's and education for me to have a look at, one sort of challenge, but also then pick up and to talk about how those changes are implemented from a long-term sustainability point of view. The other thing is, as part of my role, is putting forward, so you will see for 24-25, is actually putting forward recommendations of where I want audit to do reviews. And that's based on, I'm not a permanent member of staff, I've been brought in very clearly to do the delivery of this transformation. And I'm very much about scrutiny and challenge and identifying those issues. And, you know, for me, sort of having audits is actually really, really helpful where we need to make further improvements, but have that scrutiny on those. The other aspect is as part of, for children's and education's transformation, we are looking at our procurement processes and contract management. We are fully aware of those compliance issues, you know, and we are addressing those through as part of the wider programme and within that. Scrutiny on the finance side is quite heavy. I have a weekly meeting with our finance colleagues. Obviously, my programme's both revenue and capital. I attend Capital Investment Board. I'll have call-ins to delivery executive as well for some of the capital programmes, but also if I want any changes to profile of savings or changes to the delivery, that will also go through to the delivery executive. So I'm just going to give you that. I'm going to hand over because you've probably got lots of questions for me.
Thank you very much. Open for questions then, councillors and independent members. Okay, so I thought I was going to have to ask mine first there for a moment. Jonathan and then David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on page 41 of the report, of the bundle that is, there's a reference to an aim of having maximised our income opportunities. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on that and what sort of opportunities exist out there.
Okay, so within children's and education, we've got the skills aspects. We've got two aspects already within the directorate. So we have our traded services and then we have the skills. One of the things that I would ordinarily see is looking at further commercial opportunities that we can sort of undertake. So a good example is work I've done elsewhere with other authorities, is when you're looking at sort of your provision of properties for, you know, children's homes and things like that. We already know that our neighbouring authorities have got similar problems and similar issues. If we're really smart about some of our investor save and some of those provisions we take on, we can actually, there can be a commercial aspect to it where we offer some of those spaces to those other authorities, obviously. The key thing here, though, is missing is when I look within children's and education, there's two aspects. Financial acumen is missing, and to me that's really key in the leadership and for local authorities, public sectors, irrespective whether you're a director, head of service or service manager. The other aspect is a lack of commercial acumen as well. And so a piece of work is as part of the programme for maximisation of income is actually to work not just within the directorate but to work with our corporate colleagues and identify what a commercial blueprint could look like for the Children's and Education Directorate. There are plenty of further opportunities we could consider. And to build that, part of that blueprint would pick up on the training and skills that staff would need. And you know, that's quite a long time, but it would be really helpful to start. We do need to generate income. There are opportunities, you know. When I talk about traded service, I expect it to be fully traded and it fully funds itself. And I think part of me needs to test that, just knowing the financial pressure this directorate has and puts on the rest of the council. Has that answered?
Yes, that was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions about paragraph 3.2 on page 37 and 3.3 on page 38. So you mentioned that there are 1,442 children's placements. So is that the total number of children that Bristol City Council have under care at that particular point? Or is that the number of children they're placing at that particular time, please?
It's the total number at that time.
Cool. And then that leads me on to paragraph 3.3. You say that the number of children in care is increasing. What percentage have they actually increased by?
Oh, you do like to catch me on one, don't you?
I don't mean to. I just don't.
No. I might not have the exact answer today, which I don't like. So I suppose the increases, there's different aspects. We're seeing an increase in children in care at different levels. So sadly, we are seeing an increase in our unaccompanied asylum seekers. The reason that our numbers could be is if we're not moving, if we're unable to move on children, our young people, into alternative placements, or we're not being able to get them sort of to go back home and things like that, you haven't got that move on. So all we're doing is constantly adding to the pot, if that makes sense. All you need is a bit like, sadly, recently, where you've had a number of tragic incidents, and we will see suddenly more referrals. People become very concerned, and so what you tend to you see a knee-jerk, people wanting to sort of do further protection, and that always is concerning. It is a national issue at the moment, the number of children in care. For us, it's about actually our children would be better, more and more of our children would be better if they were in foster placements. So as you would have seen in the budget paper that was approved in 24-25, I've got capital funding to implement a fostering sufficiency, what's known as the policy around adaptations and extensions to people's homes and things like that. I've seen that and seen that really successful in other authorities, where you suddenly get an increase in people, our current foster carers being able to take on additional children, and new people wanting to be foster carers being able to because of that. We already have 10 foster carers that would take us up on those grants immediately. So potentially, and that's not just for one child, so potentially straight away with that policy, we could end up with 15 children being placed into foster care. I can get to you feedback, Councillor Wilcox, on the exact, if you'd like.
So it does lead on to another question that I'd like to ask about what ratios are actually our children being placed into homes or fosters or foster care, and what other alternatives there are for placements, because placements is quite a broad phrase, I can imagine.
It is. To give you the exact numbers, and because I do not like to give numbers, and obviously I'm not the person that does all those numbers, I lead on the transformation. I will bring that back. I will send that back to committee. Okay, I'll send it back to Alison. But one of the things on placements, you're right, it is very broad ranging. You have external supported accommodation placements, really expensive. It is not something we need to step away from. Which is why, again, we've got the capital programme that was approved at budget in 24-25 for those additional provision of homes. They're not just children's homes. We've also got crisis pad, which is about preventing a child having to go into a home or into a foster. So you then obviously we have supported accommodation. So you obviously have our accommodation and placements for sort of our disabled children, those with complex needs. You then have secure placements. Now, we do not have anywhere nearby that provides what we call a secure placement. Sadly, we have to place them quite a distance for that. It is a project I've looked at to see, and again, brings back to the commercial opportunity. is that something, when we move to a committee system, that the council would like to consider? So I've started to work on a mandate. There is lots of things, for authorities that are very nervous about having a secure home and taking those placements. But for our point of view, it would save, money, and actually better for a child to be nearer Bristol than hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and that isn't good. But I can break it down for you, so we can provide you those ratios against all those different types of placements, and sort of the different ageing groups as well. Is that helpful? We have done a whole paper on it.
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
So I'll give that to Alison, so you've got that.
So we have appreciation of the work that you do and the types of services that you do offer. Thank you.
Guy.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies, I assumed there was someone else in the queue before me. Sorry, thank you. If it's okay, so this might be a little granular, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Mockingbird programme. It strikes me as being one of those areas that is phenomenally vulnerable to the unexpected, as in the way that it reads, and done a little bit of sort of reading around it, it feels kind of as though it's using a sort of, how to put it, it's allowing for a certain degree of, this might be unfair, opportunism in the way that kind of shifts the resource used for looking after children. I can't think of a more, an area where there's more risk inherent in any sort of transformational exercise. I was wondering what your approach has been to risk around that specific project.
So the Mockingbird, from our perspective, and obviously we've spoken to the other authorities that have implemented Mockingbird, and you've probably, knowing yourself, you've probably looked and researched into that to see. It's a model, it's a way of support with everything that we're doing. I mean, obviously there is a slow process at the moment, it's not fully implemented. As with all the work we're doing in transformation, there is risks, there are impact assessments looked at, and there are those go, no goes, those sort of decision points. One thing I suppose within children's education, one of the things I'm trying to say to you, just never take one size that fits all. Just because it worked for that London borough doesn't mean it's going to work for Bristol, if that makes sense. You take aspects of it, but we need to tailor it here to what's right for Bristol, which is why when we look at the wider fostering sufficiency, we've got different interventions happening. You cannot just rely on one thing. It's a bit like being reliant on just a Southwest fostering hub. I'm not one that goes, you've got to just be part of everything that's Southwest, if that makes sense. You can model yourself, challenge yourself, and review what other authorities, and not just other cities. You can take really good aspects that are happening in, say, London boroughs. So, Haringey, for example, and some of the work they're doing around placements and things like that can work here. You just tailor it. So we do those sort of impact assessments. We're doing a review of all the projects at the moment. So I'm happy to make sure that is part of it, and that we do a feedback at another committee on that, if that would be helpful, around the whole of fostering, if that would be helpful.
Thank you. Okay. Did you have a supplementary and a follow-up, Guy?
It's just a very quick matter of clarification. Immediately below, actually, that on page, small page 10, big page 45, was, apologies, talent management. I'm assuming that refers solely to employees rather than fosterers themselves, around when it talks about recruitment, retention. I just wanted to check that was the case.
So the talent management under the operating model, that is our workforce. So talent management, apologies, I will be using my language there. So that covers recruitment, retention, that covers the development of our workforce. There is recruitment and retention issues in fostering and our foster carers. And so, maybe I just need to sort of make sure I'm clear about the difference between when I talk about recruitment and retention, we've got different aspects. So, you know, it's no different to the recruitment and retention of support workers that are in some of our homes and things like that. So I will pick that up. So apologies.
Thank you. I've got Patrick and then I've got John.
Thank you. I'd actually just quickly like to note as well, I think that there's a slight numbering mix-up, both the context and proposal sections starting to come through. The first 3.1 notes that we've got an increasing number of children in care. I think we also understand the reasons for that. But 3.10.1 under proposal talks about we need to tackle the number of young people and children who are accessing our support and reducing that level of need. And that wording seems to me to be contradictory to the increasing number of children in care. So I'm just wondering how we're squaring that circle.
So when we're looking at talking about the support and things, that is different to those coming into care. So that's some of the interventions. And some of that is us, how can we stop, if we are smarter with our earlier intervention and prevention and the advice we give and working with our external, other organisations, voluntary sectors and things like that, we can actually stop children coming into our system. I'm not saying all, because you're never going to do that, but some of those coming into the system, or some of those that are going around the system on a regular basis. Reducing it is about us being smarter, about what we're doing. We have been known to invest money into projects, with some of our neighbouring authorities. But if you look at it, what have we had as an outcome? We've not seen those outcomes, and we have to test ourselves. We might do a project that does some early intervention, but has it really had an impact? Has it reduced the number of children that are coming into the system? Not necessarily coming into care, they may come into our system of some form. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if that's right, Jan. Are we confident that we're going to be able to avoid children going without having their needs met to the extent that we are able to do that now?
I think, without a doubt, nationally and for us locally, the pressures are mounting, the demands on our services. I think there are some of the interventions we're putting in place are much stronger interventions. I think there is, when we can stem it in a different way, but we can reduce our costs by being smarter with where we focus those interventions, if that makes sense. You're never going to change, you're never going to literally eradicate the position. And actually, we have a duty of care. So, there are children who clearly need to be in care, and rightly so. What we are doing, though, is challenging ourselves on a regular basis. So all our placements, we have two working groups, one that finance sit on, and one that we have regularly on a weekly basis, where we do this quality assurance and challenge about some of the support. So if a child's in care and we've got support, wraparound support for them, one, we want to be making sure that child is getting that support from that third party and it's the right. But actually, at some point, the child doesn't need that same extent of support. And in the past, that would have just carried on, and the provider may not have actually, stopped providing that, but still charging us that higher cost. So a lot of those measures have been put in place, some of that's come out of audit, reviews and things. So we need to be stronger with our quality assurance, which is why it's having to be addressed as part of this programme.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask what part special guardianship orders play in this? Because I have a daughter on a special guardianship order, and obviously the costs to the council is minimal over fostering, for example, which is fine. But I'm wondering where that is in the mix from a cost point of view, if that's maybe a preferred option before going to fostering.
Special guardianships does play a part. I mean, obviously, legislation's changed. So obviously one of the aspects, I mean, for me, special guardianship plays a key part along with our wider sufficiency. And maybe, you know, it's a valid point to raise to say, are we articulating, are we showing that enough within the transformation? It's definitely within the business as usual. And it's probably, do I need to bring that out more in the wider sort of sufficiency, so it's special guardianship and fostering. From a transformation programme, obviously there were savings attached to special guardianships, but because the change in legislation with universal credit, we've done to that delivery executive to show had needed a reprofile, and I needed to find savings from elsewhere, because obviously we don't get the savings because of you don't have a child element in a universal credit, unlike the old working tax credits. But I think that's, yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you. I can see Guy's hand, but I was going to jump in with a couple of questions for my own Guy. I had 6 various bits of comments and annotations, but I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to cherry pick, and I'm going to go to the financial ones. So the first question, I think, is relating to the table at the top of page 51 in the bundle, where it details where it's got notes of the savings under each category in 23-24, and then sort of broader savings expected from over 24 to 28. So have the savings expected in 23-24 being delivered there or thereabouts? I appreciate, you know, you can't give precise figures.
So all of the savings bar 2 areas, sadly, I know my finances really well on them, have been delivered. So the 2 areas where we had savings, we had to reprofile and reduce the savings on special guardianships. That had a substantial saving of nearly 500k, which was no longer achievable because of the changes in legislation. So I took that to delivery executive, that got reprofiled, we've delivered the actual 97 that was originally in there. The other aspect was to do with our lovely homeschool travel. Now, originally we didn't have a saving for 23-24, but it was put in at the last time. We always knew we would struggle to deliver that in 23-24, because 23-24 was us pulling together, as you've got coming into Cabinet in March, is the new homeschool travel policy, both pre and post 16, and obviously there's savings associated to that. We also have are looking for a paper to go to first committee system when it goes live, hopefully in July, on a hybrid model for homeschool travel. So it's an EV fleet where we will looking to propose to have a small fleet ourselves. We have managed in the last month, so the last quarter, our interventions on both homeschool travel and placements, the initial ones that we had identified, have started to actually show benefits, which is why our financial position actually remained the same for the final quarter, which for children's is quite an achievement.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, again, around the finances, was about sort of, the way I phrased it here is a bit clunky, but how realistic are the sort of savings expectations over the longer term? And particularly, I was looking, you know, a lot of the costs seem to be front-loaded for sort of and balanced out over the first 5 years, and then anticipate savings sort of ongoing beyond that, as far as I can read it. So, so it's a sort of question around the how realistic the figures are, how much value for money that provides.
Okay, so one of the things I suppose is that savings for example, even in the Investor Save scheme and the homeschool travel, we only took 60%. So we have done deep dive reviews, quite strategic, intense work has been done to identify those saving opportunities, but we've only applied 60%, taking into consideration, I'm very aware that historically, the delivery of actual savings in this directorate has always been, not always come to fruition, I'm going to be kind here. So how realistic? From my perspective, they are realistic. I've delivered these programs in a lot of authorities across the country with much bigger targets and with shorter time frames. It's the mindset and the culture. We have the resources. We have some really good people that have been brought in to help us speed up the delivery. So I've got a capital program manager, because we don't have that capacity or that capability in-house within that we can just use. I'd love to use people just all internally, but we just don't have that, not the speed that we need to go at. I think the hardest thing for us, and this is an interesting from an audit point of view, is you've got savings attached to both placements and say home to school travel as an example. They are also the areas of pressure. So if you look at your 23-24, they're the areas of financial pressure. I need to evidence that I've delivered a saving by doing this intervention, and the pressure is a separate matter, if that makes sense. And I think there's some work where I'm working with finance colleagues to show how we can articulate that. We do have measures as well for everything we're doing. They're aligned to your corporate indicators, so that I've not added more. The other piece, I suppose, is some work that myself and finance is ensuring our forecasting is better, and that comes back to the financial acumen. And then the other aspect from us is a piece of work, and it's not in there, is looking at that myself and finance doing a zero-based budgeting exercise to ensure that actually, that from a financial perspective, we've got our money being in the places and the budgets are right for that, so you can do that stronger piece of work. Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you, that's comprehensive. Guy?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of hopefully quick things. One was around the revenue yet to be approved, as in the final bit of the project, that was 4 million roughly, I think, somewhere, for 24, 25, 25, 26, that had yet to be allocated. I was just wondering, given the transformation the council itself will be going through over the next few months, one way or another, how much risk is associated with that approval? In other words, without me to sort of be glib about it, but does the whole thing fall apart if that doesn't get approved at the last minute? How are you managing the risk of that unapproved remaining revenue?
Okay, yeah. So all the top, with the exception of the DSG programme, so I'm going to talk it from because it's looked at a corporate perspective. So we have the top 5 programmes, and the 5th one is the DSG. The DSG's funding is all secured because of the way. So children's and education, then the TA, adult social care and property. We all had, as you know, those costs, and we just put in a review of our costs. There is a limited budget. We have reviewed our asks, and I've looked at that and been quite smart about those asks for 24-25. We went through an initial process where we looked and actually you think that ask is within still the original pots that we had. But just in case, because obviously there were concerns about the budget process, I have looked at, in the worst case scenario, if I had to slightly reduce that, where could I reduce the resource of some of those asks without impacting those projects that deliver savings and deliver some key pieces of work, cost avoidance, like international social worker recruitment, I need that continued. It's not just got a saving, that's fundamental for our social worker recruitment and retention. Operating model, restructures, really key. I do have contingency in my ask. There is £1 million within that ask that's to do with transitions costs, potential redundancy costs. We don't think we would need anything near that, based on the number of agency staff we have and vacancies anyway, and the likelihood of what our restructure would look like. So therefore, again, there is that capacity within that. In the worst case, if we had got no money, there are fundamental projects that we would have to hold, like the international social worker recruitment and funding, the bursaries and funding for social workers, the academy and funding. So they're the, investors say you can't deliver capital programs if you haven't got a capital program manager. We've seen this service directorate try and deliver improvements through its own resources and trying to, and it's not happened. You had your Strengthening Families program, and again, you're sitting here with the same things being talked about and probably sitting there thinking, what's different? Why is it? Because of the way it's not being run or overseen by the services themselves. This is what I do. That's my job, day in, day out. Not for Bristol, it's been for other authorities. So there is a big. I'm here to provide challenge to the services as well as challenge and that assurance to finance people like yourselves.
Okay, one more?
Just a little follow-up on that. You kind of preempted me ever so slightly, but just given the number of references to recruitment and retention throughout the document, and the number of references to, I suppose, adding skill, adding resource to the workforce, delivering it, one could read this report and go, wow, the headcount is going to go skyrocket. I'm assuming that's not the case. Some of that will be delivered through training and upskilling and all the rest, but I was wondering what your assumptions were around headcount.
Yes, it's definitely not upscaling, that's for sure. But we just need to be smarter about, there is part of this project, is transformation should be a continuous thing. And so one of the things that I've talked about is how do we do this on the long-term sustainability? You don't need someone like myself. It's making sure that the service knows how to continue as that constant change and that improvement. Workforce recruitment and retention is really key. That is because we have got in our area teams over 25% vacancies. We're filled with agency, which is costly. And we've got a number of interventions that are happening, not just the international, we've got as part of our restructure is of equity of pay, is doing a regrading of social workers and occupational therapists, as you would have seen in other authorities, to align to the market rates. They're some of the proposals that will go through decision papers to CLB and people like that.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on this paper? Okay.
I'm so sorry, last one, I promise. It was actually just in reference to something that appeared in the Equalities Impact Assessment from the Cabinet paper rather than the report in front of us, but something that, given the stuff that this committee's been looking at, I thought was worth raising, which was one of the things that was raised was around income generation and the idea of discretionary concessions for external equalities-led organisations. I was just going to not ask, I suppose, but just encourage a lot of rigour in that process and how that functions and how that works. It's one of those areas that the Audit Committee has looked at before.
And I'm happy to take that to the board. That will be no different to, I suppose, when we do the paper, put forward some ideas around homeschool travel. One of the things we're looking at is how we could do a social enterprise, and looking sort of those different aspects. Those papers need, as you rightly said, there needs to be a lot of scrutiny on those proposals and what we're looking at. So happy.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Vanessa, for answering those questions, and we'll let you get about your day now, but we're asked to note the progress on the transformation programme, and I think we can consider that we've done that, and move on to the external inspections update report, which is going to be presented by Tim O'Gara.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief by way of an introduction because the report is one that comes to the committee on an annual basis, providing a summary of the external inspections that the council has had, and to give you information about the management responses and the arrangements in place to address the outcomes of the inspections. All of that detail is in the report, but it's probably worth just teasing out a few of the key things. So firstly, as you've heard from Vanessa just now, one of the key things in there is the Ofsted report from 2022, which wasn't ready for the previous iteration of this report, but as you've heard from Vanessa, there's an extensive programme of work through the Our Families programme that is taking forward the recommendations to address the findings from that inspection. There was a SEND revisit, so the SEND inspection originally was a few years ago, and there was a revisit in October 22, which found that there was just one of the 5 original recommendations remaining to be addressed, which required the preparation of an accelerated progress plan to address the relationship between parents and carers. And that was endorsed by the Department for Education, and is being the oversight of that is through the SEND partnership group. There are 5 council-run children's homes, and they are subject to the Ofsted regime as well, and 3 of those had a good inspection rating to required improvements, and for all of them there are improvement plans in place. There's a corporate, there's been a corporate corporate parenting peer diagnostic carried out, which will be reporting later in the year with a new strategy around our corporate parenting responsibilities. The planning peer review you'll all be familiar with was conducted with some fairly root and branch changes to the way that development management functions, and that's all being progressed as well. There's been a couple of compliance audits for with Homes England, the first of which was a mock internal audit in preparation for the real thing by our HRA New Build Development team, and that provided reasonable assurance. There's a piece of work that relates to one of our rough sleeping accommodations that looks at the use of grants and compliance with funding conditions, and that is due to report a little bit later in the year. We've had a couple of external reports, pieces of work done by Savills, which again we're waiting the findings and recommendations on those, and the first of which is a landlord compliance data review and also a consumer standards and preparedness review. We're anticipating that those reviews and recommendations will be with us within the next month or so. And then finally, there was a HTA, the Human Tissue Authority inspection of our public mortuary at Flaxbourton, which identified 4 recommendations, which have now been resolved. So, as the report sets out, this is an overview. There's obviously a lot more detail, much of which has already been reported to various places, and there's internal governance in place to deal with the management actions that flow from all of those reviews that have been reported thus far. I will endeavour to answer any questions, but may have to defer to other officers if the detail is not to my knowledge, Chair. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tim. I was expecting that some of the questions might have to be passed on. So committee, we are asked to note the findings of the external inspections, note any improvement actions required as a consequence of the inspection findings, and where appropriate, the management response, and note the assurance arrangements in place that oversees the council's response to inspection findings. But are there any questions or comments before we get to that stage? David and then Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. My questions is about paragraph 60 on page 61 about the planning peer review. So the peer review took place in September 23, and you have 3 sections of findings requiring immediate action, 4 to 6 months timescale, and 6 to 12 months. Should we assume that the ones requiring immediate action have been completed to the satisfaction of the planning inspectorate?
I'll have to take that away and get you all the detail, if that's okay, Councillor Wilson.
Because I've not really noticed any improvement in the planning inspectorate website. The planning applications website is still quite dire and unresponsive. So yeah, I think we should be having some updates about what has actually been achieved in this, because planning is contentious, shall we say, particularly with there was a press article last week, I think, about the fact that planning inspectorate could come in and run planning for us because it's in such a poor position. So I think we really need to drill down on this and make sure that the planning department are meeting their requirements, please.
Chair, if I may, I know there was some reference earlier in the discussion around the Q1 audit plan, and is it Q1 you'll be looking at development management? And if that's the case, then I would have thought fairly early on in the next municipal year there'll be a report coming here that will give you some assurance around the way those recommendations have been taken forward. Simba?
I think my preference, I think, Chair, is that I think that we go back to the responsible managers and get immediate response to, and then if they are concerned, then we can use that to further detail, I think, but we need to get that immediate response. It saves, I think, and we end up with a streamlined audit, because this is very broad.
Can I just check? So just so we're clear, you're interested in the first 4 to 6 months, that immediate time frame, and we'll get you a response on that.
So considering the peer review is in September and it's now March, I was expecting immediate actions to be already fulfilled, and some of them might not have been, from what I can tell.
So one of the risks of being the type of chair who lets the committee ask questions first is that they ask the questions that I've got written down here. I'd like if we could get an answer on where we're at with those immediate recommendations, and the sort of secondary 4 to 6 months timescale, whether those have been commenced. If we can get that answer to the committee, that would be great, and then obviously Simba will be doing this audit in due course. I had Patrick next.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding point 4, the council-run children's homes in the report, 4.5, talking about the independent visitors, can I just check what qualifications those visitors have, please? So
I'm afraid I don't know. We can find out for you.
thanks. Yeah, just wondering who these people are, essentially. And then 4.6, talking about the Bristol making use of the independent sector for placing children. So our aim is to place children in homes that are rated good or outstanding, but sometimes that's not possible, so we've got this process. Can I check what the minimum standards that we have are and how those compare to the homes that Bristol City Council operates itself?
I'm sorry, Councillor McAllister, those are too much detail that it's not within my immediate knowledge, but we can get you the answers.
No worries. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Guy?
Thanks, Chair. A process question, anything else, I suppose. Excuse me. I was wondering, when we do these, when these external audits come in, what happens in respect of our own internal process of thinking things like the risk register. Is there an attempt to reconcile the two, as in if something was identified within the risk register that wasn't identified in the external audit report, is that something that would trigger anything when anyone look into that as to why something had been identified as a problem internally but not externally, or vice versa?
To be honest, it's probably the other way around. Things that are on our risk register will inform not just our internal audit activity, but things that are done externally. And a lot of these things are done by national regulators. Say Ofsted will, the CQC will routinely be inspecting what the council does, and that's certainly the case for children's services, SEND, our children's homes, and well, we engage with the LGA. They're a regular peer reviewer of different aspects of council business. So it's a mix. I would say things that we have internally in terms of our own risk registers will inform where we might need to go for external inspections, but some of it is mandated and is required by legislation.
Any more questions or comments? No? Okay. I think then we can consider that we've noted that report, subject to getting the answers from those questions that have been raised. So, thank you. And the final item today. Guy, I've been informed you've got your hand up.
You know, I will deal with it offline and reserve my opportunity to come back and throw something at you by email if it is an issue, Chair. Thanks.
Now, probably, I'm anticipating probably your follow-up questions. I wanted just to add something here, in that as part of the audit planning process that we do, we consider the external inspections. And 9 out of 10, the external inspection, once it's done, for example, Ofsted, once they get an unfair or a significant risk, normally they move that into their service risk register and then through it to corporate risk. So as we do the planning process, we consider external inspections, we consider the risk registers, we consider the national outlook. But as part of the annual governance statement as well, when we do the annual governance statement, we ask all the heads of service, the service directors, and the executive directors to give us assurance statements on the external inspections and the significant issue that they've identified. And those are put on the schedule that we then use to develop the AGS, and also to inform the annual PM that I've been to the audit committee. But you have to take an additional offline if that helps.
Thank you. Now that would be really, really useful. I'll just put it out there briefly what I was considering, which was my recollection is, apologies if I'm mistaken, but on the risk register, when it looked at the issue of the planning backlog, one of the risks it raised or wished to note was the risk of planning committees overturning officer recommendations, which struck me as peculiar because making a decision wouldn't strike me as being something that could add to a backlog at all. But in terms of the external review, it didn't seem to have identified that as being a problem in the same way. But the only reference to development control committees itself, as far as I could tell, was on point M, which was questioning whether managing 2 committees was sustainable. And it just struck me that might continue that line of thinking, but still without any explanation as to what it was about those overturns that were causing a backlog. I would welcome any sort of suggestion as to what the link was.
Right, that being picked up in the audit in Q1. Okay, so the last item on the agenda is the review of the audit committee's effectiveness for 23-24, and this is going to be left up to me to present. So I'm not going to say a huge amount about it. We had a meeting prior to the last audit committee that a number of members were able to get to. I appreciate not everyone was. And we looked at the SIPFA self-assessment for audit committees, and we discussed a number of the issues that the committee faces and will face going forward, particularly as we move into the committee system. So this report reflects those discussions in that meeting, along with input from myself and officers. It's a twofold report. It's to reflect that self-assessment process, which is partly it's something that we do every year. Normally informs the annual review, but this has been bound up into a document that is intended as a handover to the new committee when the new committee comes in June. And this is going to be presented at full council in a couple of weeks' time, so that full council is aware of the issues facing audit committee, and some of the considerations that councillors who might end up on the audit committee in the next civic year will want to bear in mind going forward. So that's a brief summary of the intent of the report. Comments and questions, welcome. Jonathan and then David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is a stupid question, actually, Chair, but when it comes to full council next week, will each group need to comment on it, or is it just for noting without any discussion?
My understanding is, so there's two things that are going to be moved to full council next week. There is the value for money report for 20 that Grant Thornton sent me to this committee last July. That will be moved by, as I understand it, the Lord Mayor, because it can't be moved by a political, by a councillor. And so that will be moved, and there will also be this report, which will be moved by myself, and there will be a round of speeches, as I understand it. So yes, you may well have a chance for a 3-minute speech on this paper, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. That answers my question.
Okay, I did see someone else's hand, David.
Thank you, Chair. So if we're talking about planning for next year and probably the next 4 years in terms of how things are actually going to pan out, one of the things I think is really important is having a statement that the audit committee should actually be webcast, so that there's a proper recording of the decisions we make and how we actually make them. I think that's really important to the way that future audit committees run. And I know there's been some discussions about where audit committee might be happening as well, because of the possible uses of chamber by the other policy committees and other such committees. So if we could bear that in mind in terms of booking rooms, that Bordeaux, I don't think is particularly good for doing hybrid type meetings or even recording video meetings, but I think it's something to bear in mind, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd have loved for these meetings to be webcast. It would save Dan a job when he comes along each month. I'd love for these meetings to be webcast, and I will add that to my list of things to hand. I've got a separate list of things that I intend to hand on to the next chair. If it's not myself, who knows what will happen. But whoever the chair is next time around, there will be a list from myself of things. Yeah, certainly the webcast is one of the things I'd have liked to have had by now, but we've not been able to achieve that. I take your point with regards to, I think all of the committee rooms have similar limitations vis-a-vis hybrid meetings or the potential to webcast. We can maybe take that up offline. Simon.
Just very quickly, Chair, to say happy to support the report, and I think it reflects some of the conversations we had in the informal discussion. Well, reflects those discussions as well. Just to say, in terms of the independent members, obviously Adi and I are in trial last year, so while there's a suggestion there about additional members, there will also be the need to make sure that we're replaced in good time.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, we appreciate them. We appreciate your input, but we're also aware that at some point we will, you know, there will be new, and there will be a process to appoint new independent members of the committee. Okay, Guy, is that your hand going up?
Yes, Chair. So I was just looking at the examples of areas for further development and how it does kind of jump out at you how many of them are in fact resource neutral or close to resource neutral. It's not, as with many of the bits of the council that we look at on those areas, where all of the ways that we see it improving the service or require vast sums of money. Some of these are to do with choices and assurances and simply ways of working that pertain very often to the council more broadly. And in that context, I think the concern the committee shown about the lack of a discrete scrutiny function in the committee model working constitution that now sits with, well, ready to come in May, makes that particularly apt, particularly pertinent and important, and something I really look forward to seeing this committee look at in the future. And just to reflect on the point made by our independent members and to thank them for all they've done, but also to say that there's a huge potential for a lot of institutional knowledge within the committee following the elections. And I think that's something we really do have to bear in mind. Thank you for all the work that you're doing for handover, but that's also something we're going to need to keep a very close and watchful eye on moving forwards.
Yeah, right. Okay, if there's no more questions or queries on that, we are asked to consider and approve the report and agree the next steps. I think the paper actually said consider the next steps, but given the time scale for full council, those next steps have rather been decided in advance. So we shall note that. Thank you. And that brings this audit committee to an end. Guy, you're looking at me quizzically as if my agenda, as if you've got something else on your agenda, which I don't. That brings this audit committee to an end. Our next meeting, our last for the civic year, is an extraordinary meeting on the 25th of March to look at the signing of the accounts for 22-23. So we shall reconvene then. Thank you. And I'm being informed there may be a need for a pre-session to that particular meeting to look at the statement of accounts ahead of the formal sign-off. So bear that in mind. Well, no, by the 14th of March I'm being reliably informed. So just be aware of that in your diary and planning. Thank you.
Yeah, very good.